which forms an important part of our scrutiny of the Chief Constable on behalf of the citizens of Gwent. So thank you to everybody for your attendance today. I know we've got a number of apologies that we've recorded as well in relation to this. And before we go any further with our meeting today, I'd just like to put on record, really, the thanks of not just myself, but the entire team of the OPCC to our Deputy Chief Constable, Nikki Brain. This would have been her last board meeting. And I'd just like to really put on record our thanks to her for the work that she's done and the way that she supported the scrutiny work that we've undertaken. I know she's had quite a distinguished career within Gwent Police, and it's that range of experience that I'm sure has underpinned the effectiveness with which she's dealt with our scrutiny here. And I know throughout that, she's held a strong commitment to justice and protecting our communities here in Gwent. So as DCC, and of course in the other roles she's played prior to this, Nikki's worked closely with my office, which is very much appreciated by us all. And on behalf of us all, I wouldn't just like to acknowledge that, but I'd like to thank her for her years of service and wish her also a long, happy and healthy retirement.
We'll ensure that that is going passed on to Nikki on annual leave. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move then into our formal meeting for today, and we'll begin with the minutes and the actions from our previous meeting. So firstly, are colleagues happy to confirm that the minutes are an accurate record of our meeting, please? Yeah, everyone happy with that? And we've got a list of actions there. Is there anything that anyone would like to raise in relation to the actions that isn't covered as we go through our agenda today? Yep. Move to item 3A on our agenda then, which is the inspection progress report. And Chief Constable, is there anything that you'd like to highlight in relation to this report?
Thanks, Commissioner. I will start by saying I'm unable to turn my phones off at the moment because I'm in a national position and a position within courts in relation to community tensions, which I'm sure you understand with the country. Yeah, looking at the report itself, I did want to recap on some of those aspects. I know colleagues will have had opportunity to read it in detail, but I think it is a forum where I would like to highlight some of the progress extensively that we've made within force against the last inspection. So if we look at the report, I'll cover off matters in turn. There's a number of independent inspections that are ongoing and have recently been undertaken. The first of which was a inspection on how we dealt with serious and organised crime. That was conducted at the autumn of last year. We will get the confirmed results for that in the summer of this year. There's a strong indication that that will come back as an adequate response, which I think we need to understand is an acceptable response, that we are delivering exactly what we should be doing in relation to serious and organised crime. I'm greatly encouraged by the things we talked about before, how we're over 400 disruptions a year. By comparison to a number of years ago, we were around 18 disruptions a year. So good progress in relation to that arena. We're one of 6 forces that have had a firearms licensing inspection. They've been positive commentary in relation to the way we deal with mental health professionals within the force control room, and we're looking forward to receiving what I think is a positive report in relation to that from the global updates that we've had. We've also had an inspection of recent over our retrospective facial recognition processes, which we're obviously an early adopter of within the country. We've got a forthcoming investigative powers commission office inspection. We've been partaking in regular reassessments on our approach to Operation Soteria. So we deal with rapes and sexual offences self-assessments. We've had very positive engagement with the centre and the national team, who've given us clear indications about that they're content with the way that we're having an evidence-led transformation in the way we approach the Soteria principles. And we're in the process at the moment of putting the 8th force management statement together in its final stages for completion which will obviously positively contribute towards the next inspection programme. Out of the 43 level 2 recommendations that we were managing and the areas for improvement, of which we had 36 level 3 recommendations, 18 of those which were previously submitted at the last inspection, they're all being worked on. I wanted to cover off a couple of those particularly significant ones because I think some of them have got incredible relevance when you think of the current situation that we're facing in policing nationally right now with regard to tensions. So the first one being that the force needs to record its equality data correctly. So that's not a unique position for Gwent, obviously. However, it's one that's vitally important in relation to the way that we deal with people with inclusivity and the way that we make sure that our officers deal with people professionally and proportionately at all times. So we've got a data performance group set up. We've got updated guidance, revised training in relation to the way that we undertake that, our activity, a clear communications package with frontline officers so that they understand the need for the self-defined ethnicity aspects to be completed. Flags, markers, protected characteristics all need to be forming part of that data analysis. We've got good help from our digital services department in being able to enhance that capability as well. We're looking to complete that delivery of training by the end of this year, by the end of 2026. Huge, combination factor there for us to looking at having community confidence from all parts of Gwent. So one that we're really tracking and progressing as an important area. We're also looking at making, we've also been, an AFI to make sure we effectively monitor and understand use of force, which clearly links into the last commentary as well. We've strengthened our governance in relation to having a coercive powers board chaired by the Chief Superintendent of the Neighbourhood Pillar. It looks at emerging trends, outcomes, proportionality rates, and it feeds directly into the ACC Ops Engagement Board. We're looking at our custody review to make sure that all uses of force are recorded effectively and that handcuffing is understood, which is a bit disproportionate at the moment in relation to use of form submissions. We've got internal scrutiny aspects of the way that we undertake our use of force as well. We audit cases and there was 100% compliance of the 25 cases in April that we reviewed that had use of force forms submitted. Only 20 out of the 25 were using body-worn camera, and we're taking action in relation to that because that is a requirement as well. So officers will be ensuring that they understand the requirement for that and having face-to-face feedback when they haven't complied with that. That walks hand in hand with us having the external scrutiny panel, and obviously we've got that set up as a terms of reference, and we're looking to launch that imminently, and put that side by side with something just to explain the context. So I think the report alludes to it, but just to explain the context, our young persons independent advisory group, we've successfully run the young persons independent advisory group for the last year, had great outcomes and real shared understanding with young people. What we want to do now in relation specifically to the area that we're looking for as an AFI is to have lived experience from people who've had use of force and stop search and coercive powers used on them by police officers. We want feedback from community representatives. So our Chief Super of Neighbourhoods has spoken to both IAG leads and community representative leads to tap into their existing forums to get feedback from lived experience individuals who haven't gone through vetting. So that we can find out what their experience was. We're also moving into the second stage of having a new young person's IEG, because obviously it runs for one year, and then we replace the people on it. What we'd like this year is to have some individuals who maybe have had some different experiences with policing, and look for some people who've maybe got maybe had a negative experience, or had peers who've had a negative experience, because it's important for us to not just have people who've had positive experiences. And then we can, by having that shared understanding, by having those open conversations, answering questions, we're able to have individuals go back out into their communities and tell people about what they see and what they understand from what policing are trying to achieve. So we're in a good position in relation to understanding and monitoring this area. The next point is ensuring compliance. So ensuring that we're actively having our staff and have a thorough understanding on the requirements and that it's consistently lived across the force area. Another AFI that we've got is that the force having external scrutiny panels for stop and search and use of force and meeting regularly enough, and our representative of the local population spoke to the Chief Super of Neighbourhood in relation to this. It's very much commencing that progress in work. It's going to be first launched in Newport, but the intention is that that is then going to go wider across the whole of the force, and we'll work on some good practice to embed that from an external perspective for feedback as well. We've also got the area of making sure a neighbourhood policing model is sustainable to achieve positive long-term solutions to community problems, and our systems and management processes need to support effective problem solving. Now, you know, Commissioner, that this is something that is really dear to heart, something that we are progressing rapidly and at pace and consistently. It's a personal focus, a personal commitment. Strongly believe there's a link here between trust and confidence long term. We've really made sure that all of our staff understand that and our supervisors, and it forms much of our daily conversations and monthly meetings that I have with local policing inspectors, where they give me particular updates on their activity within their areas. On the broader brush spectrum, obviously in line with the neighbourhood policing guarantee, we've had an additional 22 neighbourhood posts. We've got stronger governance in relation to our problem solving approach, our abstraction rates, and our visibility right across towns and cities. We're utilising IR3, so our technological opportunities to ensure that people are out in the right place at the right time in their areas as neighbourhood officers and PCSOs. And we're monitoring abstractions into other duties, which is really something that we're trying to keep to a very minimum, not looking at people who are in neighbourhood roles, being reactive and dealing with the here and now. Really have an opportunity to focus on problem solving and getting upstream in relation to key to some of those long-term issues by working with partners. We've reviewed our partnership tasking processes. We've looked at and we've got leadership scrutiny, oversight of neighbourhood delivery. We've now got over 90 staff who've had the first phase of NPPF, the Neighbourhood Policing Programme, problem solving stage delivery given to them, and we're looking to roll out the next stage of that as well alongside the College of Policing. First line leadership for inspectors and sergeants on problem solving, and our problem orientated policing coordinator delivering the external statutory and non-statutory partners the same principles as well. So we've got a real joined up link of public service approach to tackling these issues. We look at we've also, as you'll be very aware, we're entering the second year now imminently of our community action teams, who are the bespoke unit to address hotspot areas across the force that are experiencing heightened crime or antisocial behaviour. They've worked in 3 separate areas now, because you get 4-month attachments to each area. They are going to move on to their next area imminently. That's data driven, it's narrative and feedback driven by our stakeholders and our community, and monitoring our complaints from the public as well. So they are moving into those areas that are most needed, monitoring that the patterns, and really having a bit of an impact, a huge impact, not a bit of an impact, a huge impact on the public perception and feedback that we have from what they're undertaking. You'll be aware, we've discussed before, our Neighbourhood Matters programme, our technological app that we're rolling out. Our PCSOs and our NPT team continue to do the face-to-face door knocking, updating people on things in their area and things that are important to them. We've now got to a very good position in relation to the number of subscribers, but we're not content on that. We're intent on being the biggest users of Neighbourhood Matters, because we see the clear correlation between and improved trust and confidence. Only one method, obviously, and that will be very useful for certain individuals, but doesn't replace that face-to-face engagement or using other comms methodologies that we know are popular in certain areas, such as using radio frequencies and surgeries in person as well. Our school visits are going really well. We've now got a programme whereby we are able to monitor the activity and engagements and visits that every school across Gwent has. Our figures are very positive by comparison to other forces on the engagement we have with schools. Important area for us, obviously, with young people to keep on board. We have conducted an audit of our problem-oriented policing plans, we're in the process of doing that for the summer to ensure that that is embedded and being undertaken by not just people in the neighbourhood pillar, but it's an approach that is consistently delivered across the force. There's an AFI for attending calls for service within published attendance times, effective supervision incidents, and updating callers if there are delays. I think it's fair to say that you're more than aware, Commissioner, we've come a long way since that last inspection in relation to this particular AFI. That AFI was done on a window of time of the inspection, which had already moved on by the time that those inspection results came out. We have got daily scrutiny through our daily management meetings and our twice daily pace setter meetings, which has got chief officer oversight on all calls and attendance rates, specifically picking up on the team, picking up on failures and reviewing quickly why they've happened. We've got a well embedded Chief Inspector Silver model, working 24 hours, 365 days a year, and a real good oversight, and that feeds into monthly governance and performance reporting as well. Our functionality within our force control room is very, very clear, with people having clear responsibility for what falls for them, rather than trying to do everything and not achieving what is required of them. Our dispatch manager system knows that they've got the responsibility for emergency priority incidents. Our demand manager aware that they're looking at outstanding demand and support and resourcing decisions. And that threads right throughout the whole of the control room. Sustained improvement, I know we've talked about a number of times, reviewing incidents continuously that fall outside of criteria and taking specific action as well on domestic abuse incidents to ensure that they have a priority focus from our teams. We're now at a position where we've consistently been delivering emergency and priority response times of arrival between 80 and 90%, which when you think 2 years ago we were between 35 and 40% is a dramatic improvement, and one that we will be maintaining. Our call rates, you'll know, our control room fits within the top 5 within the country every single month, and sometimes the top, which is something to be proud of too. We have got further work that we do need to undertake though, because we have got to get better at getting caller updates and victim updates as well. Much of our demand coming through 101 is still people seeking those updates. There's exciting technology on the horizon which doesn't get alluded to in this report, which will assist us in relation to that. However, it will not replace the fact that people need to take responsibility for providing those updates, not just in person, but also by updating the technology app itself, because it's only going to be as good as the user. And it'll be used carefully, I think, as the ECC organisation has oversight of this. It'll be used carefully and bespoke, in a bespoke manner, to ensure that it's sensitive to people's needs, not just for their updates, but also via offence type and the way that we're dealing with people there. Another recommendation is for the force to make sure officers and staff assess and report risks of harm to children and adults thoroughly and promptly, and that systems provide reassurance and take appropriate action to safeguard adults and children at risk. So we revised our guidance of late to improve the quality of the information on PPNs, and there's further training plans in relation to that. That will include the digital PPN platform, which will take away some of those manual requirements and an ability to actually put those PPNs out to multiple local authorities, as opposed to doing it repeatedly in a lot of capacity and capability being taken up. Domestic abuse risk assessment training being delivered to all frontline staff that will be completed this summer, and engagement with our partner agencies to understand thematics and address key concerns and have a shared understanding. They'll walk alongside us having a greater dip sample and a check and test capability on how we deal with these matters as well. Other recommendations which we've grouped together for the purposes of the report relate to the investigation, opportunities of creating plans, improving supervision, allocating investigations to teams effectively, and making sure there's timely investigations and achieving proportionate outcomes, and the effective use of bail and release under investigation. We have been embedded now for several months, a detective super post that we've done additionally to oversee our quality investigations and victim care programme. It'll include the 6 touch points of victim care, risk management, suspect management, investigation standards, supervisory ownership and performance and compliance. Some interesting progress, I think, in relation to our crime allocation progress being reviewed and updated, and now a suspect management policy developed, which will give us better ability to manage bail and release under investigation aspects, because we'll now have the ability of chief inspectors picking up on that early to ensure that cases don't get near their conclusion and fall into that release under investigation category. We've got a new quality service review investigations dip sampling tool. That'll give us an opportunity to ask core questions in relation to investigations to test that things are being dealt with effectively. Our monthly investigations boards are happening, and we look at not just the quantity but the quality of issues and positive outcome rates, which is a big focus for me personally this year, trying to drive us to a point where we get at least 15% positive outcome rates. I'll come to that shortly, because that's not an easy ask, but something that is an aspiration for us to enforce this year. All of our pillars, not just crime, contribute towards that. And what's been really important is ensuring that workload balance is shared effectively. We've listened to our teams for our employment opinion surveys about workload distribution. This new tool allows us to look at officers carrying no more than 15 crimes to ensure that they can do timely and effective updates and investigate effectively, rather than have outstanding workloads, which doesn't do victims any justice and adds additional stress and pressures to officers. Another AFI is for the force to comply with domestic violence disclosure scheme guidance and timescales. Pleased to report that the DVDS process is reviewed daily and monitored through DMM. I think it's fair to say there's been a whole-scale dramatic change in relation to how we work since that inspection was conducted. We now meet the compliance fully and have done for a sustained period in relation to that without backlogs. We have got a contingency plan should demand go escalating again, and that particular AFI has been sent to the Force Liaison Officer for sign off, but we're unable to confirm that at the moment, but very positive that it will be. We've also been asked as a force to increase our use of preventative orders to safeguard vulnerable people in more appropriate cases. We revisited our terms of reference. We've got a civil orders improvement working group together. That looks at best practice, benchmarking best practice from other forces, what our training looks like, what our backlogs look like, and our supervision and ownership. We work closely with Joint Legal Services in relation to improving the quality of applications. And the next step for that is ensuring preventative orders are used effectively across the force as well. We've also got the AFI for making sure we have enough suitably trained and skilled staff to effectively carry out safeguarding roles and functions. It's good to report the safeguarding hubs are fully resourced, as are our PPU now at full capacity. They reviewed demand. We understand that fully that safeguard is not just their responsibility, though, it's a whole force issue. So all of our response officers, our neighbourhood officers, our first point of contact officers need to understand vulnerability and intervention programmes. Our specific specialist officers, however, in safeguarding and PPU are getting sound training and tailored inputs on all those key aspects that you'd expect them to be having. AFI for making sure we understand factors affecting sickness to improve well-being of the workforce. This has been a tough area for Gwent Police historically, and one that we've struggled with. However, I'm really encouraged by green shoot signs that we are starting to address some of these issues. ACC Ops, Vicky, really driven and led in relation to this particular area. Monthly sickness group being led, reducing sickness hours, looking at what the well-being factors that we're having from feedback from staff is, so that we can act effectively, and making sure that our supervisors are addressing things in a consistent manner and looking at people as opposed to tasks, which is a whole focus for us moving forward. We look at what any long-term and complex issues are, and ensure support mechanisms are in place, and any thematic issues are addressed as well. That has assisted us in relation to putting together a sickness framework toolkit for delivery, clearer guidance and training for our staff and our managers to deliver this effectively. There's some emerging things that I'll touch on in the future that we've also got planned, but we're really improving in this area. I think there's a direct correlation to some of the things I've talked about already about workload balance and ensuring people have got manageable duties, so that they don't feel those pressures within their workload. We're seeing positive feedback from the employer opinion survey, from the staff associations and networks, and also from improving data on our Power BI dashboard as well. We've got an AFI for effectively managing demand and the right resources, processes and plans to keep communities safe. We've recently conducted the the response demand remodel, and run that for a detailed operating model review. That's allowed us to look at what forecasted demand looks like, what workforce assessments and plan changes will bring benefits, and what risks will remain outstanding. Will be greatly enhanced with the assistance of the Joint Data Analytics Project, which will help us do some of that demand analysis as well and give us a really good picture of where our peaks are, where our hidden demand is, where we're seeing repeat offences and where we're not meeting our demands as well. Coming towards the conclusion now, another AFI was making sure we effectively communicate organisational change to the workforce. Again, something that we've got to get right on a macro and a micro level. So on the face of it, we've got a employer opinion survey progress green shoot signs again, that we're seeing a consistent improvement how we are communicating change, and our change team and our comms team are working together to get effective and regular meetings out in relation to that. A really nice addition I think that we've had of late is through our leadership insights meeting that I chair. Our comms team are putting together a monthly document for midline managers, which is called the brief. The brief talks about key strategic issues, not too many, but key strategic issues that we want our midline managers, inspectors and above to engage with our staff about, and it gives them indicators of what opening lines should look like when you talk to your staff and seek feedback. It's in line with our leadership insights aspirations around invisible leadership out with our teams to understand what the issues are that are current for them. But it also gives us an opportunity to give absolute priority organisational messages to the front line as well, to ensure that people are kept up to date with changes in the organisation included on that. But I say that's the macro aspect. The micro aspect is really important too. So we're threading in that communication aspect to all of our teams that they need to have those regular conversations about the small changes, like a sergeant changing or a vehicle not going from one sector to another. They're the sort of issues that are sometimes causing some of our staff to be perplexed as well. So that open engagement communication needs to be fluid and continuous. The last section of the report refers to personnel considerations and specifically to some of the issues that we were pulled up on last time by HMI at their last inspection on leadership. Now you'll know that I didn't agree at all with the grading that we were given at the time. However, I take on board that that was the perception, and so we've looked to continuously improve what our leadership looks like across the force. I've referred to a selection of issues in the report that is ongoing work. So our force management statement at the moment is embedded within the board's the force management statement has to marry up to what we're trying to achieve and has to be quite consistent in all of our governance. The Chief Inspector in relation to governance and assurance is running the GRIP meetings with the pillar leads to ensure that the AFIs that we've touched on already are all getting traction and where appropriate are escalated to chief officers where there are blockers or challenges. I've mentioned the Leadership Insights meeting that I personally chair. They are identifying issues for us from the front line and from departments, which are key issues for us to understand to remove blockers and improve situations for people on a daily basis. We're encouraging our local management teams to lead bespoke meetings themselves to speak to their staff about things which are being done well, not so well, and what could be done and improved. I've mentioned about the brief. You know already about the fact that we're working with the College of Policing in relation to leading inclusive teams project. We're looking forward to the next phase of hearing what some of the feedback is from the College of Policing on where that will progress next, by comparison to some of the other forces that have been involved in this as well. We've rolled out, and Nick will tell me the number here, successfully 90 Hydra exercise, bespoke culture Hydra exercise.
That's more 300.
Is it 300? 90 on the last batch. Yeah. So 300. So we've rolled out 300 Hydra culture exercise programs with the University of South Wales down in Newport. I've got to say the narrative, having personally gone there and the feedback that I've received is extremely positive. I was impressed by the whole of the programme, but I know Nick is focusing on getting the formal feedback to look at how we can look at best optimising the ability to roll that out and what that looks like moving forward to get the best value for money too. I think it's key with leadership when you look at it, something that was picked up in the inspection report was the use of temporary ranks. We've now got a very stable position. I know you referred to the fact that the DEP is imminently retiring, but other than that, we're in a very positive position in regards to stability. Both ACCs permanently appointed and doing very well in their roles. The recent promotion ranks of Chief Super and Super taking us up to full establishment in those key critical visible roles of leadership, which is really encouraging. In fact, over establishment in some cases because we've had to cater some additional demands that are ongoing on the wider front as well. First line and midline leader management training is very well embedded and receives regular positive feedback. And then I think important to sort of conclude with a couple of forums which I think are really positive for us. New forums. Vicky, as the ACC Ops, is lead on the Female Flight Path Forum, which is a really growing new network where female officers and staff are able to highlight challenges and barriers for lateral and hierarchical development within the organisation. Really positive feedback in relation to that at the moment. And a new forum literally being launched is our Navigator Forum, whereby we are having a target audience of individuals who've got less than five years service within the organisation to hear their feedback on what they think they do well and what we could do better. And that is officer and staff orientated as well. And I think what has to be included on this report was, I think, a really positive stat. 50% of our staff right across the whole of the organisation belong to a network. I think that's a really impressive figure and reflects really well by comparison to other forces across the country. People are taking the time to join networks because they feel that gives them a power of voice about key issues which are critical to them and their concerns. And I take great encouragement for the fact that they feel that that's worthwhile as an exercise because their network leads lead for them and speak for them over issues to improve the service that they are part of and that is their service. So I think that's a really positive thing. That's a whistle stop of that document, Commissioner. I'm happy to take questions on it, but I think it was important to flesh out some of the points there because there's a lot of work that's been undertaken in that arena since the inspection was undertaken. By no means saying it's a finished product, but lots of things in progress.
Thank you, Chief Constable, and it's very positive to hear the progress that has been made in relation to those areas for improvement. I've got a number of questions for you, if I may, and if I could just begin by reflecting on the comments that you've made in terms of the improvements that you've made as a force to the quality and completeness of equality data, how you're striving as a force to achieve that. How will the senior leadership team ensure that there's a consistent approach to that within the wider context where we've seen NPCC guidance recently issued in relation to some matters that disproportionately have a negative impact, potentially not just on our citizens, but on people within the organisation. We heard only yesterday, it emerged yesterday evening, that the Home Secretary is considering asking the NPCC to revise their guidance on anti-racism activity as well. There is a connection between policy, between that guidance, and then what actually happens on the ground here. So it's very good that we're sat here today and we're hearing about the positive actions that's been taken, how you have got greater confidence in your management of that equality data, and how that enables you to ensure that you are delivering an inclusive and effective policing service to the citizens here in Gwent. But how, as a leadership team, how will you continue to ensure that that happens within the operating environment where things are guidance is literally changing overnight, and this has the potential to have a detrimental impact on the services that are provided?
Yeah, I think your question's pertinent. I think the operating atmosphere that we're working in right now, more than ever, I keep saying more than ever because it always seems to be more than ever, needs a requirement for some very sensitive handling and stable and consistent approaches. I think we're seeing national tensions at a very high level right now over a couple of incidents, and obviously a divided rhetoric that's happening from certain people in political positions and in media, which is obviously feeding into building some of that tension as well. Hugely important for us because many people have got very different viewpoints on this. And I think what for me, we mustn't get away from is a couple of things really. One is we brought out a police race action plan, for example, and we had a large drive on inclusivity because there was large statistical data to show that we weren't dealing with things proportionately. The race disproportionality rate in itself tells you that that's not right. When the average national stats are over 7% more likely to have a stop search or use of force on someone of a black origin than a white origin, it tells you that there's a requirement for proportionality and for drastic action to ensure that we have addressed certain issues which are not being approached correctly. Of course, there is always going to be an incident whereby people can build a narrative on. The current incidents that are ongoing, there's some immense tragedy that I think we'll all agree that have happened in relation to this, and some lessons learned to be learned for policing in relation to some of those incidents. But I think we shouldn't take away from what the long-term course of action is, and that is to be inclusive to all of our communities, regardless of what they are, who they are, religion, race, gender, sexual preference, whatever that might be. We want to have an inclusive approach to all of our communities. So it's key in relation to long-term trust and confidence, which is our shared mission as an organisation. How are we going to do that? So my chief officer team are absolutely wedlocked in relation to where we are in relation to this mission. Wedlocked in the fact that we're not a reactive organisation. Of course, we react to incidents and make sure that they have the best service that we possibly can, but not reactive in relation to that will knock us off our steer of our long-term vision and our commitment to our communities to provide an inclusive service. So we will embed the fact that this self-defined ethnicity requirement and gap will continue to be met. Technology will help us in relation to that with the investment through the Joint Data Analytics Project, through the hard, consistent driving of training of our staff on the importance of completion of data, through robust governance and checks and balances, through everything from our coercive powers through to our full operational effectiveness board, looking at disparities, addressing disparities, educating, training, and picking up on tension monitors, such as complaints or feedback that we've had from stakeholders or the community on certain events of tension. That's happening right now. So right now we've got a forum of our chief inspectors and staff equivalents looking at the consequences of the current issues that are being undertaken. And some of this data that they'll have will be really helpful in the future for building up what the picture looks like from a tension monitoring perspective within Gwent. So it's paramount to our operational effectiveness. Equality, diversity, inclusion is an operational priority for us to have that long-term approach to addressing crime and antisocial behaviour. It will be threaded through our governance, it will be threaded through our performance monitoring, it will be threaded through everything we do. If that sort of answers what your question is, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I welcome that, and this is an issue that the citizens of Gwent that I represent raise with me, and I welcome the assurance that you've given on that, and I'm sure that they will too. So thank you very much for that. Just looking a little more closely at that. Can I just ask, how will the terms of reference for the new coercive powers meeting avoid any duplication or conflict with the work of the existing legitimacy scrutiny panel?
Yeah, so what you will have at the moment, you're aware of this, Commissioner, the legitimacy scrutiny panel look at the body-worn camera footage of incidents, and they will give feedback on the lived experience and their opinion on what's happened. So the coercive powers panel will be looking more at patterns, themes, and statistics right across the board, so that we can enhance the training capabilities rather than the isolated incidents. So it's a bit more detail of what we're picking up on. But do you want to add on that, Vicky, at all?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And the additionality is that it will give us more of an opportunity to provide the legitimacy to the public, because one of the pieces of feedback that we had from HMI and the Chief touched upon it within the AFI is that we are not reaching out within our communities enough to make sure we get that full range of opportunities. So we're hoping it will enhance what is already in place, but we will obviously make sure that there is no duplication of incidents that are reviewed, people that are involved within that scrutiny. Because I think for me, the more scrutiny that you can give to the use of quite dynamic and, powerful powers within our community, the better. But we will make sure that that split is evident.
Okay. I think that's something that I'd like to come back to again as this is embedded, because there is a risk there, I think, of duplication. So I'd like to come back to that again in the future. In terms of engagement and the support from our citizens, it would be remiss of me not to mention in Volunteers Week the excellent event yesterday where we acknowledged the contribution that our volunteers make across Gwent, and once again I'd like to put on record my thanks to them. I'm really interested in the work with the Youth IAG, and I'd like to know, there's lots of things I'd like to know, but in relation to the discussion here today, so what plans are there to evaluate the effectiveness and the impact of that? So how do you know, you've had a group of young people who you've been engaged with for some time, how will you evaluate the impact of that? How do you know that their views have been listened to and there's actually been an impact on the arrangements that you have in place for service delivery? And you mentioned that the Youth IAG the tenure of the youth IAG members is 1 year. And I think that's a really interesting contrast there between the tenure of our IAG members and the youth IAG members. And I just wondered whether you could explain why youth IAG members are only part of that group for a year, when our existing IAG members, some of them have been in place for many years. So why is there the disparity between more mature members
Yes.
of our community compared to our youth IAG?
So I think picking off the pieces in turn that you've asked there, Commissioner, with the Young Persons IAG, as you know, that was the very first year that we've had that. We're one of the only forces that have got Young Persons Bespoke IAG set up. It's something that I really wanted to have within force because I want the community voice of young people. Say many times on, they're not just the future, they're the now, unless we need to understand. And they're also an area that traditionally we still have struggled on getting connection with and understanding what's important to them. So really happy that we've now got that up and running. In relation to your first question, the intention is for the Young Persons IAG to give their feedback on what their experience is over the last year. We've deliberately paused on that until the GCSEs are finished, because many of the members are literally coming to the end of the conclusion. So GCSEs concluding next week, I believe. So yeah, the next, and we'll then be doing that hot feedback with other people to that. The intention is for them to look at who the next group of individuals are. And I've already had a conversation with both the Chief Superintendent of Neighbourhood and also our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Lead about really having an appetite for having a very mixed group of individuals on our future IAG. Some of whom, it's fair to say, on the initial concept that we've set up, we've had very willing members coming forward from community representatives who are trusted to us, who have put people forward for being part of that group. What I'd like in the next group is some people who need a bit more persuasion to be involved with IAG, because their lived experience has not been one that maybe is as positive, and they may have had a negative interaction or have peers or family members who've had negative interaction. So that's the aspiration for the next group of IAG members, because we want to have some more lived experience and feedback, which is not always positive, but good for us to hear. I think the aspect of reviewing the tenure is something we've not excluded the fact that people can't remain on the IAG, and if they did want to remain on the Young Persons IAG, they'd be welcome to. There obviously comes a point where it becomes not young anymore in Young Persons IAG terms. So we'd have to look at what that transition could look like, because I'm also aware that quite a lot of members of our IAG are not at the end whereby they're in their 20s, early 20s. So I think there's an opportunity for us to have a more diverse range of ages on our established IAG too. So I think it's all positive, and it's something that we're progressing and developing. I'm really encouraged by the initial things that our IAG, our Young Persons IAG, have come up with. They've had inputs on things that they've asked to have inputs on, so stop search, use of force, hate crime, antisocial behaviour. We've had specialists from the force giving them inputs, and they've been able to fire questions on behalf of their peers to those specialists and have that feedback to be able to tell their peers as well. So I'm really actively looking forward to what their feedback is. I think it gives us a great platform, and one that we can carry on launching and developing on in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. And just on a connected point, I'd really like to acknowledge the early positive feedback from the firearms licensing inspection, including the establishment and makeup of the dedicated IAG. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I wanted to ask, how is that learning being captured ahead of the final report being published?
Because I know both of you are very close to the detail.
Okay. In the final report, obviously, so I think it'd be you don't want to prejudge what comes from that report. So as soon as that comes in, it's a thematic report, so it's unlikely to make much reference to Gwent Police in itself. There will be references to Gwent Police threaded throughout it. So in terms of publication or communication, it's quite difficult to point to it. I think internally, we've sent out to stakeholders, I think, what those positive outcomes have been. So Firearms AAG is a good example of something that we were rated quite highly for. So that feedback's gone back to the IAG and to the people involved. So I think it'll be a case of let's wait for the final report, let's see what it says, and then see what we can pull up with it and then communicate it through that.
Yes. On that, do you think there's value in any other areas of force business that a dedicated IAG could be used to assist? So where has that been considered?
Yeah, it's a good question. Could be one for the learn the lessons. We can actually to look at where we could pick that up from.
Yeah.
It'd have to be such an area, I guess, where you know, we have need for engagement. I'm sure that they're out there. It difficulty becomes sometimes it's finding people to volunteer.
Yeah, and I don't
That's
underestimate the amount
a
of
challenge.
work that would be
But-
needed to do that either, because I know that.
Yeah, we find out that there's a real
Yeah,
keen, engaged community that want to be involved. I'm sure those are out there in other areas of the business. So it's a good suggestion and one I can pick up.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just we've had some really positive feedback today in terms of improvements that you've made in relation to engagement and communication with staff. And you've talked to us about some of the improvements that have been made there. And you've been quite candid in terms of sickness and sickness absence. And you've mentioned that the toolkits have been developed to support staff with that. Within those toolkits, is there a plan to reframe the language that's used? Because has there been any consideration of the impact that the language that's used can have a detrimental impact on those people who are experiencing a sickness absence? And I think you know exactly what I'm making of.
Yeah, I'll think to a second, but I think you're right, Commissioner. We've talked about it for a long time in relation to even the headline of unsatisfactory performance is an immediate blocker for line managers to start completing when they're talking about people who've got sickness, because obviously we want them to be well-being orientated for their staff, and immediately it gives that negative connotation. Unfortunately, we're a bit hamstrung by that title, but in relation to your question, I'll let Vicky expand on it in a second. I think our letters and our pro forma responses to people and individuals is in progress of to ensure that it has a aspect of person caring delivery as opposed to being pro forma and task orientated. Fair to say that?
Yeah, that's fair to say. So we queried it quite early on. I've had queries about it when I've managed people. Because ultimately some processes can end up in dismissal, we are legally, as the boss used the term, hamstrung to certain terminology, but there is a little bit of flexibility in relation to some of the stages that come before it. So for example, we've had feedback from the Federation and other bodies around some of the words around development plans versus support plans, growth plans versus action plans. We use the terminology now, APE, which is an absence improvement plan as opposed to a development plan. And there are some minor changes that can be made with the letter, but please be reassured, we've had those conversations, because I've been in the position where I've had to have those conversations with people, and I know how it lands and I know the impact that it has on individuals. But actually, because the ultimate outcome could be a dismissal, there is certain information that we have to provide somebody, and unfortunately that feels quite cold. So what we're doing in the briefings that we're delivering to people, and HR are leading on this for us, and we've gone quite wide with people, is make sure that this is delivered in a way that's not impersonal. So what we don't want is our letter landing on someone's doorstep cold without a phone call or a meeting or an acknowledgement that it's coming, because actually the wraparound that you can give is the support then that can assist with the letter that goes with it. But I am in agreement with you, and it's one that I've had to be a little bit hamstrung with.
Yeah, and certainly as an organisation that also uses the services provided by the enabling services provided by Gwent Police, I would raise concerns about the lack of empathy, and I think there is an ability to deliver a message, which has ensures that legal requirements are met without appearing to lack empathy completely.
And that's why the line manager's role is so important in it, because you need that relationship with the line manager.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for that, and that's reassuring. You mentioned that 50% of staff are engaged with staff networks, belong to staff networks, and we've got a real privilege. We meet regularly with representatives from the staff networks as part of the OPCC, and it's for us, it's an important part of our engagement and that wider engagement across the organisation. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of that engagement, it's really positive, the arrangements that have been put in place, that there's a lead senior officer now to connect with those networks. And I know from the feedback, certainly the feedback that we've received from network representatives, that that is welcomed. But I note that the last two consultative meetings have been cancelled. So where does the ownership for that sit? Because it seems to me that that's an important platform for that collective engagement within the organisation. And in practical terms, there have been a number of cancellations.
Yeah.
So where will the ownership of that sit to enable that ongoing dialogue with the representatives of the networks?
Yeah, so there was a national issue that came in where all chiefs were called, where the JSNCC had to be cancelled at short notice. I looked to put my PA looked to put that in for the following week. Unfortunately, most of the network of members weren't available for that date. So unfortunately, we've had to push that one on somewhat, but being very candid, the responsibility lies with me. That is a forum that I value. The networks coming in with key issues for them is something that I really do appreciate that we have a regular representation on. And unless there's a critical piece of business, then I keep that meeting in place. It's just been unfortunate timing of some incidents that have driven that.
I think you mentioned you're reviewing that meeting as well, aren't you? To look at just update the approach and everything as well. So,
absolutely. Yeah, and the agenda for it. So that at the moment it has been for some time a forum for networks to give their appraisals and updates, as opposed to a bit of a two-way flow, a bit like what I referred to in relation to the key messages in the brief going out to staff. It's important for us to go out and seek viewpoints, but to utilise the opportunity to thread key strategic messages as well. So yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah. I'm particularly thinking, for example, that PCC mentioned the guidance coming out now and particular things that the networks will be particularly concerned about. There's plenty of opportunities there, aren't there, through that meeting to have those conversations. So that'll be really helpful.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the line of questioning that I've taken here in relation to these issues is because I'm often asked about the commitment to staff wellbeing here as well. As you know, my police and crime panel members are particularly interested in that. So I think it's important in this environment that I'm able to explore that in more detail on the.
So I totally share your appetite for that wellbeing as the focus of everything. And we're all a huge believer that if you have a happy workforce, you will feel motivated to come into work, you get a more productive one. I think the employer opinion survey is really positive in showing that we've got people who are feeling valued, and we're progressing in those stats, the questions that we've asked. People feel valued and in their workplace, and that is reassuring.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further questions? Anybody else got it? Thank you very much for that update, Chief Constable. That was very valuable, and it is really positive to hear about the commitment that the force has to continuous improvement, and certainly improving against, not just improving against the AFIs, but that consistent approach that you wish to take going forwards. And thank you and the team for your leadership in relation to that. We'll move on then to our next item, which is the organisational performance report. And if I can hand over to Vicky. Vicky, you don't need to go through it slide by slide, but if you could just give us an overview of this. Is there a way of sharing this information on the screen, please?
I'll pop it up now. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
It's okay with yourself, 40-page document. I've streamlined it into 60, but I'll just 16, but I'll pull the highlights between 16, and if there's any questions, I'll go back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, thank you. So I'm putting it down in relation to alignment against the priorities of yourself. We started with engagement about 15 people snapshot the perception survey, but the bits that I really wanted to pick up on is the piece around communication. As you'll know, and the Chief touched upon it earlier with the work that we've done around Neighbourhood Matters, we are very much tracking the impact that has on people feeling informed, and what we'd like to see are the two lines closing further together. So we've moved from 36% of people agreeing that they feel informed in quarter 1 of 24-25 to 44% in quarter 4 25-26, and those that say they don't feel informed is reduced by 9%. So those lines are much closer together. The piece of work that we picked up on is that acknowledgement that actually one size doesn't fit all. So in the area of concern where people are saying that they don't feel as informed, what other opportunities have we got to make sure that we're using a range of tools which we can get the information that is available to them. And we are very much focused on language, we're looking at demographics, methods of communication, areas of concern, preferred means and tools that can be used to make sure that we are reaching all our degrees of population. That moves then into preventing crime and ASB around the local concerns and confidence. And again, we can see a reduction in the people who disagree that they don't have confidence, which feels like a double negative, but is a positive. So there are less people now that disagree, they don't have confidence in workplace, and reduced from 15% to 11% over the quarters. So going in the right direction. Moving into preventing crime and ASB, and if I touch just upon the overall numbers in relation to where we are, overall crime over the last 3 years has seen some seasonal dips and spikes, but that number is now starting to flatten. And what we will see and have seen so far into the 12-month period is a slight decrease in the conversion of incidents to crime, albeit the number of incidents that are coming to us have seen an increase across the board. So when we do the work with Citizens First, we are very much hoping that that will have a knock-on consequence in terms of the capacity in the control room and otherwise. What that is converting to then is an increase in overall crime solve rates of quarter 4 with 13.3%, and we track it in terms of personal crime and Rex related crime as well. So we split down the differences and we understand both, because of course personal crime will have the most impact in terms of our victims, not necessarily mitigating the impact across businesses and elsewhere. So we're continuing to track that number, and we are looking to make improvements this year. And as the Chief said, we've got actual aspirational outcome figure of 15% for the financial year. Just the last element to touch on then in relation to the preventing crime and ASB area. We submitted the ASB action plan, as I know you will be excited on, ahead of the March 2026 deadline. So there's lots of work in there in relation to closer working relationships with us, with partners, some key themes around visibility, offender management, and the use of our ASB powers. But we've made some improvements about how we track the usage of those powers, how we monitor them, how we make sure that it's preventative in terms of having a positive impact for our community, and we're ahead of any of those issues emerging. So that's quite a different step change for us in terms of very much having that line of sight in relation to the powers that are being utilised within the community. And then neighbourhood matters now moved from implementation phase to business as usual, but we are managing that through the engagement board because there are many modules within neighbourhood matters. It's not just about signing people up and using it for two-way communication flow. It's about knowing your community, understanding where the gaps are, who aren't you reaching, how do we understand what people's priorities are, how do we get key messages out. So lots of opportunities in there for us really to inform the public, but also to be informed by the public and making sure that we're reaching a wide range of people. I touched upon as well some of the Safe Schools updates, but I won't go into it because the Chief covered it off in the AFIs, but I can cover it off in more detail if needs be. In terms of making our community safer then as a priority, very much highlighted most previous violence. What we can see is a reduction in the number of crimes which have been recorded, and they are only very small numbers. We're talking actual single figure numbers, even though we see the reduction, but we're also seeing an improvement in the solve rate up to 26.3%. The most serious violence offences are reviewed during the serious violence meeting, and they're owned within CID to make sure that we've got the appropriate allocation, the appropriate resources with the right skills to deal with the offences, because we know the impact it has on the community. Of particular note, you will know that during this time we had 2 homicides, which of course from a community perspective are very impactful. So we've been monitoring those through community tension assessments, making sure we've got the appropriate resources with the right skills in order to ensure the right outcome for the victims of those that have really tragically lost their lives. But it goes wider than that for us. We look at patterns and themes and being. I'm pleased to note that there aren't any, but it doesn't mean that we can't do more work in terms of intelligence science. So we're changing some of our processes in the background to make sure that any preventative opportunities that we have, we make the most of. And that particularly comes into play with some of the work that we're doing around intelligence, which relates to serious violence. Sticking with the theme of making our community safer then, and if I touch upon residential burglary. So we exceeded the upper control limit in Q4 for a second consecutive quarter. And what we are really seeing are 3 areas of spikes. So Monmouthshire, Piccadilly and Torquay all had a spike, interestingly, by 5 different models at various times that were active within the community. Those investigations have been owned by CID. 2 of them have had offenders linked, some of them have been dealt with and are currently in custody. Interestingly, today on our premise, I didn't plan this for the meeting, is another gent in custody for 5 commercial burglaries in one of these areas. We think he may also be linked to residential burglaries, and we're trying to understand whether or not there's anything that we can do from an investigative perspective there as well. So we review daily the suspects that are linked to residential burglaries, because we know the type of harm it can do to a victim. We thought of somebody coming into their home. That is quite impactful emotionally. And just a reminder, the residential burglaries as well includes the sheds. So we do make sure that we review the OEL, so we are prioritising the right threat and risk to the victim with the response that is received. But we monitor those individuals daily, and any suspect that is identified within the last 24-hour period is someone that is dealt with as part of our When's Most Wanted prioritisation from our DNA processes. Just an emerging issue then in relation to making our communities safer. I say it's emerging, but you will be well touched on this, particularly from feedback that you get from the community, is around the impact of electric bike scooters, particularly for criminal and ASB purposes. So it's a challenge, as you will know, but we've had quite a lot of success recently, particularly with the CAT team and with investigations undertaken by the neighbourhood team in relation to the seizure of bikes, tactics that we're utilising in order to furnish the investigations, using drones, using fixed wing aircrafts, because we know the impact on the community is high. And whilst we haven't seen it in Gwent, what we have seen nationally is some real tragedies as a result of these e-bikes and scooters being utilised. Moving into protecting the vulnerable, particularly topical, given some of the questions that you had earlier, Commissioner, in relation to hate crime. So we are seeing a reduction in relation to the reporting around hate crime. Our solve rate dipped down slightly quarter 4 to quarter 1 last reporting period, but has improved and remained stable since then. In terms of the outcome rate at court, so for those incidents that go to court for hate crime, we see about 80.4% result in a successful conviction, which is really high. And we've got agreements in place with the CPS that any hate crime investigation is given prioritisation in terms of review by the CPS in relation to a decision, because we know that actually hate crime is not only impacted for the victim, it's impacted for the community, it's impacted and unfortunately utilised by some people in order to instigate the behaviour. So we monitor community tensions through core groups in relation to specific incidents. We're also with the neighbourhood teams are well engaged with the IAG members, stakeholders within the community and key individuals. And then specific incidents we monitor through this forum. Last item I was going to pick up in relation to protecting the vulnerable is around domestic offences. So we've changed some processes in terms of better identification of domestic offences so that we can ensure that they are prioritised in terms of making sure that any identified suspects are dealt with as quickly as possible in relation to protecting victims from future harm. Our domestic solve rate is at 8.9%. It is not where I want it to be. We've still got more work to do in this area. We're working really closely with the CPS in relation to the DA charging portal. And that is going well, but if I'm very frank, the numbers are still small. So I had a meeting on Tuesday with the strategic joint leads from CPS. We're going to do a piece of work around 70-day charging and how we set targets and expectations of all our partners in relation to DA to make sure we are getting the right outcome for the victim as quickly as we can. Because whilst we monitor compliance and we monitor timeliness, we monitor a piece of the puzzle, we monitor investigation, but actually for a victim of DA, it's a journey and there needs to be better linked up partnership work to make sure that the victim is supported throughout that piece of work. So that will be monitored through strategic joint now, and I've no doubt we'll share some updates with you through the Criminal Justice Forum. So the other bits just to note then in relation to protecting the vulnerable is I'm sure you will have seen that there's going to be the new bespoke criminal offence in terms of cuckooing. Now we do know we see cuckooing within our community, so this will be an offence that can be utilised to better protect some of the individuals, because it hasn't been, whilst we can do it, the safeguarding opportunities, there are other offences, this makes it much easier to be able to protect individuals. In terms of putting victims first, I've touched upon this one because we spoke about investigation timeliness before, and I shared an update in terms of the knock-on consequence of the CTI backlog, which is reducing, and we're still aiming with 4,500 this side of the summer, and the team give me the reassurances that that is achievable. It has came down ever slightly, 4 fewer days to 46. We are monitoring this through the Investigation Standards Board. We also are now breaking it down in terms of offence type so that we understand the timeliness impact, because we know, for example, some of the timeliness of the investigations held within our RIC team are longer, but very often that is the right thing for the victim, because that is a victim first approach, and we need to make sure that they are cared for and treated with empathy, but we need to understand the wider impact on other offence types as well. Victim satisfaction, I've included some survey data so you can see that there's been slight increases across all 6 metrics that are monitored in relation to the victim satisfaction survey. When citizens first go live, we will also have another opportunity to survey the response that the victims get from policing. We will be agreeing that survey detail and signing that off today for wider consultation in the Citizens First meeting. And that hopefully will give us the metrics that we can consider in terms of assessing our service to victims. And then I'll just touch upon two large matters, Commissioner, if that's okay with yourself. In terms of reducing reoffending and children in police custody, I've included this because I'm very considering the fact that we've got the children in police custody issue on the risk register as a risk we need to tolerate because of the partnership approach that it's needed. But I just think it's worthwhile then for us to monitor how many children we have coming through custody processes. And there has been a reduction within the last quarter of 121, and currently are doing some work to monitor how many hours an individual is in custody for, because our intent, unless there is an exceptional circumstances, is to not keep juvenile custody longer than 12 hours. There will, as you know, be some free exceptions to that, but that is our intent. And then the last matter, excuse me, is the emission issues around the legislative changes around eligible offenders being released from custody, because we know that that will have an impact on our IOM teams. We know it will have an impact on probation. We've already got procedures and structure in place by which we're monitoring that demand and scenario mapping it through our model board. That's been in process for a number of months now, and I get a monthly update in terms of the tide of change, so I can understand whether or not I need to respond to make any internal infrastructure changes. We know there's been a financial investment in probation for them to be able to respond. We also know that from September onwards, the number of individuals who are eligible to be released from custody is going to increase, and it's going to increase quite significantly from September to June next year. So that's one that we are very, very closely monitoring. And the other part of it is it goes wider than people coming in and out of custody and the knock-on impact in terms of offences. There's a bit for our officers in here because there is a morale piece around you lock up an individual, you take them to custody, you might not be able to deal with them on a red case as we would now because they won't meet the guidance in terms of what they are likely to receive from a custodial sentence, so they're released back to the community. Or we decide they meet that threshold, they're charged, remanded, and then released at that point. So there will be an element for our staff where they are seeing the same people on a bit of a circle attraction. That, if we are not careful in terms of how we are managing it, and if we don't ensure that our staff have the context, could be quite demoralising. Our stance on it is that we need to behave very differently. We deal with people at the earliest opportunity and attract people as best we can. But I just think it's important to understand there's different aspects to that issue. I made the highlights, Commissioner, but I'm happy to go into any aspects of the report.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that overview. I think just on that particular point, before I go to my other questions, it's really good to hear you acknowledge and recognise the impact on the morale of staff of this, and certainly we are in a situation where we've got a number of central government policy decisions operating in parallel.
Yes.
And the unintended consequences of that are the risk of detrimental impact on other areas of service provision. And I'm particularly pleased to hear you highlight that, because this was an issue that was discussed yesterday at the Wales Safer Communities Board, because of the impact, the potential that it has to impact not just on policing, but on other service providers as well. And it's important to recognise, isn't it? And the public need to be aware of this, that whilst there has been investment in the probation service, probation processes have been changed, and actually there will be a reduction in contact between the probation service and offenders in communities as well. So the monitoring from probation will actually be reduced. It's just the investment is to deal with the number of offenders who will be in the community. And I think that's a really important issue that certainly for me as a representative of the public, to ensure that the public are aware that this is the unintended consequence of policy decisions being taken in parallel rather than taking a connected and collective approach. And this will have an impact across all of our communities in terms of all of our public sector services. Clearly, policing will be impacted by this, but it also places demands on our local authority partners as well. And it's important that we recognise that because there's a level of unacceptable risk associated with this decision. And whilst I fully support the activities that are being undertaken by the police in order to mitigate that risk, you can't be the owners of that risk across our communities, and there is a risk, and we need to understand that, and that's a direct result of the policy decisions that are being made in relation to that. I'll stop there. So I'd just like to really focus on some of the points that I've derived from the performance report that we've looked at here. And I'm glad we've been able to clarify the points in terms of trust and confidence, because I know that the narrative was a little bit confusing around that. So I'm pleased that we've been able to do that. I'd like to ask you mentioned antisocial behaviour, and specifically I think this morning there's 200 responses on a local media article online, or there were this morning. Those number of responses have probably increased by now, in relation to whether people feel safe within Newport and Newport city centre. And we know that there is a public space protection order in place in Newport city centre. So what specific actions are being taken in Newport in response to the increase that we've seen in antisocial behaviour, and how is that public space protection order being enforced by Gwent Police?
So there's a lot of work going on in relation to Newport. So particularly in relation to the city centre, the city safe plans have been reviewed in their entirety. There's been some really positive feedback given from the business community as to what that response now looks like. So it's neighbourhood owned and led now, and reinforced by the pillars as opposed to pillar led from response, because the priority for that area is emergency and priority calls, which previously could have had a detrimental impact on how we responded to the city centre. So that's been flipped around the other way. You will know as well that we've been running ARC Vigilant, which is a cross-force approach to individuals committing harm to others within that city centre space. I think within the first month, although Jodie will correct me if I'm wrong, there were 22 arrests in relation to ARC Vigilant. So a hugely powerful tactic that's being used to target those individuals, and it's not just crime related behaviour, but there's ASB related behaviour as well on the city centre. The plans going forward is that it will be retained by neighbourhood, and it feeds into some of the planning that I touched upon earlier that's owned as part of the wider ASB plan. There are a number of orders in place, but we're going to go above and beyond. This is moving slightly outside of the city centre, but you will know that our intent is to look at another clear hold build site, and for that to be in Newport, because what we recognise is that the work that's been done in Romney has been hugely powerful, hugely positive, has made a significant and sustainable change to the community, and actually that could and can be replicated within Newport, because what you've done is an awful lot of work in Newport, but we need the partnership approach now in order to sustain that change. It can't be just policing led. That said, there are a number of orders in place. So you've got the public space protection order, we've got a number of CPNs in place, you've got a number of individuals on orders not to attend the city centre. We monitor all of the orders and the breaches through the ASB portal now, which has been created for us for an analyst. And Commissioner, I haven't got the number to hand about how many people have been arrested for the order, but I can get it for you from the app. That's not a problem at all. And then that information goes to Jason White through his Engaged Communities Board. He monitors those orders, and then it feeds to me at the Engagement Board. And part of the question I ask is, you've got a problem within this area, and that the number of orders you've got per 1,000 population, because that's how we monitor it and that's how we compare nationally, doesn't correlate with the harm that you are seeing. So what activities are going. So that's the way I monitor, I audit it, and I hold people to account. We can also see what other forces do in terms of making sure that our approach is equivalent or comparable to other forces, to make sure that we are going in the right direction, and I have that data made available to me as well.
Okay. I welcome the explanation there, and I'm sure that any citizens who are viewing this or would view the recording of this meeting would welcome that in their own time. But there is clearly divergence in terms of the activities that you've just mentioned here and the perception of the public in relation to this particular area. I know myself from an incident that's been raised with me recently by a number of citizens, an incident that they witnessed, that there is a perception issue here, and I won't talk about it in detail because I know that it's the subject of an ongoing complaint from members of the public, so I won't talk about it in detail. But what can be done further in terms of the level of communication in relation to this? Because I understand, and nobody understands better than me, the need for partnership working and the relationship between partners in relation to the public space protection order that's in place. But citizens ask time and time again, why isn't this enforced? Because their perception is that that public space protection order is not being enforced. And you mentioned a proposal to develop Clear Hole Build. We know from the evidence that Clear Hole Build works, but is there a risk that by establishing a Clear Hole Build area, and I note on that also that the guidance says there should be consultation with PCCs in relation to that, and there hasn't been any as of yet. So, but just is there a risk that resources could be diverted from addressing these city centre issues if a Clear Hole Build area is established as well? Because there are only so many resources available. The reality is that, and you had mentioned this was led by neighbourhoods, there are only so many resources available at any one time.
Yeah, so there are resources available at any one time, and please be reassured, Commissioner, for anything happens, a proper consultation will be done. It's not something that can be done without a partnership approach. But we also have had significant investment within our neighbourhood teams. So the Chief touched upon the investment we've had during year one and the uplift in terms of 22 individuals. The further investment from year two in neighbourhood policing guarantee is 18 additional staff within the neighbourhood policing world. And whilst I've said that the neighbourhood team will have priority for an awful lot of this work, they are not our only resources within this area. So we've got a number of new technical tools which are available to us to make sure that the information is better available to our wider resourcing picture. So we have utilised the new briefing and tasking tool in Torvine, and that includes information such as what has happened within the area in the last 24 hours, who is wanted in an area, what orders are live in an area, and that might be a public space order, that might be a DVPO, that might be a call, it could be a range of orders for which we need to share that intelligence. That system is now being utilised in Torvine and rolled out, and from next week it will be extended to Caerphilly. So that will give us a better sharing of information in order to make sure that people are appropriately tasked, because whilst we've got the uplift in neighbourhood, and that's a hugely positive thing for us, when we look at other forces who are having to reduce numbers, for example, of PCSOs, We are growing, so that is hugely positive. We're talking about City Safe and the town centre. They have their own dedicated neighbourhood teams. There's a neighbourhood team direct for the Newport City Centre, which in reality is a very small footprint, a very busy footprint, but a very small footprint. They're supported then by their colleagues, Newport East and Newport West, who have their own dedicated teams. And if there is a need for demand outside of that, we have response teams. So that we won't be in a position where we have one ward manager and everything is expected to fall on that individual's footsteps. This is a forced response across pillar to threat harm that we are dealing with, and some of the tools that we will have will make sure that that information sharing is better than it ever has been. So I think that's a positive step change for us.
It's really positive to hear about that information sharing. What step measures will be in place to provide assurance to members of the public in relation to this? Because there is, at this point in time, there's a significant gap between the activity that we know is being undertaken and the level of awareness that the public have.
So it's really interesting, the perception piece. I mean, we talk about it a lot in terms of what we communicate and then the perception of individuals. Interestingly, and this is just to give an example as opposed to it being a direct response to your question, the perception of the public now is that we are as good at responding to emergency and priority calls as we were 12 months ago. We know we're significantly better than we were 12 months ago. I'm sure you see it with 101 calls, because the public very often think that we're not good at answering 101 calls. We know our average answer rate is 1.5 minutes and our abandonment rate is single figures. So there is definitely a disconnect, and I would suggest a range of metrics between what we know we're delivering versus the perception of the public. I think that goes in a couple of ways. I think our staff and our officers need to be better informed, because there is no doubt that sometimes the impact of what we say and we do will have an impact of the public. The work that the comms team around the brief is trying to change some of that narrative, because it's not only talking about change, but it's talking about what they're achieving. Because I think we're very fortunate. Our officers and our staff do a really good job, but sometimes they do it without stopping and really appreciating what they've achieved. So that onus is on us as leaders to make sure that that breathing space is there, so that they know that they're doing such a good job. Because if we look at everything they've achieved over the last 12 months, they've really achieved some outstanding stuff for us. So I think there's an education piece internally, because I think that will have a direct consequence when we have contact with the public. And then there's a piece for us in terms of how we use our social media, which I think has significantly improved over the last 12 months, but that does require an interaction from the community. And then the third piece, I think, is the bit of work that I touched upon in relation to neighbourhood matters, because neighbourhood matters can't be just about who comes to us, who wants to receive the information. It's about the work that we need to do to understand who we're not engaging with, and then how do we reach that pool. And that's the work that will come through the engaged communities forum. So I think it's threefold, if I'm really honest, and I think we've still got some work to do, but I think we are having the right conversations in the right space to acknowledge that we've got to do that work.
Okay, thank you for
Just have
that.
one more question, actually, as well, just because he's really good at engaging with key people on the ground. So that starts with, I think, when the chief are meeting AMs this week.
We are, yeah.
Yeah.
And that sets the example for the continue right down the tier. So Vicky's team will be engaging with community councils, town councils, local councils, and it's getting the right people at the right meetings to try and build those messages out. So I think that's also really important for us.
Important point, and echoing what Nick said, that Friday will see us as an opportunity to talk about that force-wide letter that we obviously didn't roll out because of PERDA prior to the elections. The intention is for a pan-Gwent update to go out to those elected officials, and a request for them to carry on circulating that information as well, because I think it's yet another forum that we could, as Nick's quite rightly said, that we can optimise more as being trusted partners to help get our messages on multiple forums, really.
And it's clear, obviously, I'm participating in that engagement myself, and you know, I do understand that that is happening, and I welcome that feedback. Just sticking on the point of trust and confidence, really, and providing assurance to the public. We've had as many homicides in Q4 as there were in 2025 altogether. What is the force doing to reassure the public about that? Because the public will be concerned about that. And clearly, that's across the Gwent police area.
Yeah, it's really tragic. I won't go into the specifics of the incident here because I've just kind of mentioned about the live streaming, but we have reviewed them all to understand whether there's patterns in behaviour, patterns in individuals, underlying themes that we need to acknowledge. That there isn't is the very basic response to that, neither in geography, the way these horrendous offences are being committed, links to individuals, reasons for offences being committed. So I'm not sure I'll ever use the word reassuring when it comes to a homicide, but please know that that work has been done. That said, what does worry me, and this is despite a reduction in knife crime calls, because we have had a reduction in knife crime calls, a reduction in knife crime incidents, a reduction in offensive weapons calls. My personal worry is if anyone were to commit more serious offences, that is an opportunity people can take. So not directly linked to the homicides, but when we review them, it makes you look at the wider picture. We have a process in force in relation to how we monitor and manage firearms intelligence. We call it the FRAM, but it's a very robust procedure about how we do some work to prevent additional threats. We are going to extend that to knife crime intelligence, and I just want to be really, really clear. That's not because knives were part of all the horrendous incidents we are talking about, but nationally, we have seen it. So for us in Gwent to have the best opportunity of protecting our public against further harm, that is something that we are doing. So there is lots of work already ongoing in relation to most serious harm. That work is being coordinated in one plan and being led by Jason White, but collaboratively with Andy Tech because of the crime element. But that intelligence scope we are going to expand just to satisfy ourselves that if there are any preventative opportunities to prevent serious harm, we are taking them at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you for that, and that is very helpful, and certainly on behalf of the citizens that I represent, I'm sure that the intention to extend that to cover knives as well and the risks associated with that will be most welcome and will provide a level of assurance to our citizens in our communities, because there's we know that there's a national problem, and it's good to hear the Gwent are taking that very seriously and extending that. So thank you for that.
I think you touched on a very important thing. However, what I will say is what you highlighted correctly in that quarter has been an incredibly resource-intensive commitment for Gwent Police. For a small force, by comparison, we have gone under, I think it's fair to say, pretty unprecedented challenges in recent times. And I think it's a great testament to the staff who've not only attended and dealt with those scenes incredibly professionally, which are quite traumatic scenes, I will say, but the investigative teams have been committed to it, but as well, and the people who've been involved in those. But I think important to raise that incredibly, our business as usual delivery has been sustained to a relatively high level, with some occasional blips, as you'd understand, when there's multiple scenes and ongoing. But I think it's been a big testament to the teams right across Gwent to sustain that business as usual delivery in this important time. It's important to highlight it because obviously it has had a bit of an impact on some of our performance metrics for a bit of that window.
Yeah, and I'm really glad to hear you mention the human side of that as well, the impact that it has on officers and staff too in dealing with that. So we recognise that and we understand that. So thank you very much for that. If we just move on then, and I'd just like to focus on some aspects around vulnerability. So we know there's from the information that's been provided and the evidence that we've looked at, and the information that you've discussed previously in terms of the AFIs, you've told us about the improvements that have been made in relation to domestic violence, the approach to that. We've seen the evidence of that in recording and reporting, which is actually a positive, isn't it? So whilst the numbers may have increased, it is really positive that people are coming forward in relation to that. I just wanted to ask though about stalking. So the report mentions, well, it acknowledges that the stalking training from last year hasn't improved outcomes yet. What have you got built into this to review the current approach and identify any further improvements that you need to make?
Yeah, so interestingly, we've had our first conviction for cyber-related stalking, which I'm trying to just triangulate, but I think it might be the first in the region as well. But we're doing a piece of work to understand the learning in relation to that, because a significant proportion of our stalking offences carry a cyber flag, because lots of stalking offences in this modern age are cyber-enabled. So we're using that case, because that's a really significant sea change in relation to securing that conviction, to understand what lessons can be learned and then disseminated from a training perspective, because that's really new for us. In terms of the wider stalking piece, this is monitored through the investigation standard meeting as a standalone topic, because we understand the impact. If you remember, we were experiencing quite a significant increase in non-domestic related stalking. Now those numbers have plateaued somewhat. The risk is still there, and particularly again around cyber-enabled non-domestic related stalking. So this behaviour is unfortunately something that is becoming more and more prevalent in modern day society, and I think the behaviours of our communities allow it to happen more commonly, which is an horrendous thing for anybody who is a victim. So we review repeat offenders, we review repeat victims, bearing in mind they could be the same in many instances. We review investigation timeline, we review specialist skills which are needed to review them based on the threat and risk of the stalking which is relevant. Some individuals are reviewed as most wanted for Gwent Police. There is one today that we are looking to deal with because of the prolific nature of her offending, and we are very much keeping an eye on the solved rate, because stalking is not easy to prove evidentially, and we are not necessarily an outlier. There's a piece of work that's being done by Cheshire in relation to how they prevent and protect people around the orders related to stalking as opposed to the convictions from the stalking offence. And I've asked Laura Bartley to conduct a piece of work for me around peer review to understand what we can learn from the Cheshire model. So lots of work going on, but I think the preventative opportunities might give us a better opportunity to prevent some offences.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, and I do have a few more questions that I'd like to ask you. The missing children data shows us the number of missing children reports, but we know, and we do know this from a range of different experiences, that one child may have multiple reports. So do you have an understanding of how many actual individual children were missing?
So we are the force that has the highest per thousand population incidence of missing for children in the UK, which is a worrying stat for me. Charity helped me share the data because we now have got access to the wider data pool to be able to understand where we sit. And we've commissioned a piece of work which is going to be led by Chief Superintendent John Davis, who owns the missing portfolio, to understand why. What we do know is a lot of the incidents, the missing children, are from children who are not Gwent residents but moved into Gwent. And then there's ancillary elements about how we best protect them, understand the risk to them, and make sure that they are looked after, safeguarded and cared for. So yes, we do know exactly how many individuals we have gone missing. In terms of the support, we utilise the support of the exploitation teams, because that is sometimes appropriate depending on threat, harm or risk to the individuals. We have orders in place, and particularly around abduction type concerns for some individuals who might be subject to exploitation. We look at the locations, we look at the themes, but we are now specifically looking at the demand as well, and what is the root cause of that behaviour.
Okay. And are you liaising with other partners in relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask, do you have the comparative data for the number of individuals as well as the number of incidences? Or
No, just
the
number of incidents, just number of
Okay.
incidents, yeah. It's quite level comparative data,
Yeah.
quite level.
Okay, and just kind of, I suppose there's an overlap then between that particular point and a question I'd like to raise in relation to Pillar 5, which is reducing reoffending. And what's your understanding of the main contributing factors for the noted increase in young offenders?
There is no trend, if I'm really honest. So whenever we have a young offender that comes into custody, each case is reviewed by the chief inspector in custody. If they're not available, they need to be reviewed by the superintendent. That's after they've gone through a rigorous progress to make sure that they should be in custody. We also review the number of detentions that are not authorised by youths. That number is generally pretty static, but there is quite an awful lot of governance around the fact to ensure whether or not they should be in custody or not. It's being reviewed by offence type, by offence location. We had a few spikes which were linked to some of the tragedies that we had that caused an impact on this quarter. But other than that, there are no specific outlying matters. Newport is the highest area which causes an impact, but that hasn't changed. That's been in position for some time. And as I said, now custody are working to 12 hours, where it's right and appropriate based on the offence type and the individuals, because we're very much mindful that custody is not always the right place for a juvenile.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, so I will leave it there. Has anybody got anything else before we close on this particular section? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for your contributions there, and on behalf of the citizens that I represent, thank you to all the policing colleagues and policing staff across Gwent for the work that is undertaken here to protect across our communities in Gwent. So at this point, we'll close the public section of the meeting. Scott?
All done.
Thank you. And we'll move then to